My stepdaughter pawned my late father's watch and used the money for a day out, then told me to get over it. He's dead anyway. When I confronted her, my wife laughed and said, "You're not even her real dad. Know your place." I stayed silent. That was 3 months ago. This morning, they were both crying, calling me dad, and desperately begging for forgiveness. My wife and I love each other a lot. We're solid in many ways, but there's one thing we heavily disagree on, and that's how to raise my 16-year-old stepdaughter, Susie. My wife firmly believes Susie's old enough to do literally whatever she wants. No consequences, no restrictions, nothing. And the worst part is that if I ever disagree with her, I get reminded how I'm just the stepdad who should know his place. The thing is, I've been in her life since she was 5, and I've tried everything to be a great stepdad. I've paid for ballet lessons, drove Susie to every competition she had, and I still cook breakfast for her every day, but she just hates me for seemingly no reason. For example, just a few months ago, I caught her selling disposable vapes to 12-year-olds. Given that my own 14-year-old nephew was recently hospitalized because of vaping, something she knew, I was enraged, but I managed to collect myself to calmly talk to her. But she refused to even speak to me. "You can't tell me what to do. Only mom can. I'm not talking about it." She then rolled her eyes dismissively. That's when my wife joined in, telling me, "You're not her dad. Don't act like it." They backed one another up, and my wife took her upstairs to talk. I don't know what was said. All I know is Susie is yet to admit she was wrong. And then, my relationship with Susie, which was already rocky, plummeted to rock bottom a few weeks ago. She came to me asking for a new MacBook after she dropped it and scuffed the corner. It wasn't broken. It worked perfectly. And so, I told her no. I didn't have that kind of money right now. I'd spent a lot in the past year helping with my dad's funeral costs. I told her so, and she snapped at me. "Why did you do that? He's dead anyway. That money should be spent on me and mom." I was shell-shocked, frozen even, my throat clamped shut. "Got you there, didn't I?" She mocked my silence. Before I even knew what was happening, my wife ran downstairs. She took Susie's side without even asking what the original conflict was about. And before I knew it, I was getting called dumb and a terrible stepdad for prioritizing some dead guy over the light of my life. I couldn't even speak. I just stayed silent, waiting for them to stop. But then Susie outright insulted my dad, asking me if I got my uselessness from him. That's when I exploded. I yelled at them to shut up so loud my voice broke. They went silent, and I said that Susie wasn't getting a cent, and until she apologized, I'd be cutting off her allowance. This was the first time I ever raised my voice like that. I went to bed that night feeling guilty and borderline mad at myself for how I handled the situation, and for the next few days the house was silent, cold, thick with tension, until something broke the silence. It happened the day I went to visit my father's grave. Every Sunday I went there to talk to him, and I always wore his old watch. It was the watch he gave to me, 3 generations old and priceless. I'd even bring the original box with me, which I'd set down by his headstone before talking to him. I know it's silly, but the watch being there made me feel like he was really listening. I went to my drawer to take it out, but the watch wasn't there. I panicked. I started checking every drawer, and rushed downstairs to ask my wife if she'd seen it. But instead of a response, I was met with silence. Radio silence. I asked her again if she knew where the watch was, and this time, she tried to divert by asking what I wanted for breakfast. She even rushed into the kitchen and started preparing something, but I stopped her. I asked her again, very sternly, "Where is the watch?" I maintained eye contact the whole time, and she broke. She started crying, begging me not to be mad. I chuckled nervously. Why would I be mad? It's not like my watch is gone or anything. Well, that's when she spilled. Turns out, Susie was mad at me for not buying her the MacBook, and she deemed that to be the fault of my deceased dad. In her mind, I needed to let go of my connection with him, and once I did, I'd be more than happy to spend my money on things that actually mattered. So she took my watch, pawned it for a couple $100s, and right at this very moment was out, treating herself and her girlfriends to a spa. My world stopped when my wife told me. I felt so many emotions at once. Rage, sadness, betrayal, everything, but I didn't show any of it. In fact, I stood there smiling, because while my wife was looking at me concerned, telling me we can get the watch back, my mind was on one thing, and one thing only. If Susie wanted to act like a spoiled, entitled, bratty gremlin, then I would treat her like one. Because this was no longer just about the watch. This was about being the man my dad raised me to be. I grabbed my keys. Karen started panicking, asking where I was going. I didn't answer. I drove straight to the pawn shop in town, there's only one, and asked about the watch. The owner, James, knew me from my regular visits to look at fishing gear. "Yeah, someone brought in an old Omega yesterday," he said. "Young girl, maybe 16 or so." My heart sank when he told me he'd already sold it to a collector who'd been looking for that exact model. I explained the situation, that it was a family heirloom stolen from me by my stepdaughter. James seemed genuinely sorry and offered to call the buyer to see if they'd return it. I spent the next hour pacing around the shop while James made calls. Finally, he came back with some news the buyer would return it, but wanted triple what he'd paid. It was nearly $1,200, money we didn't have just lying around. I immediately withdrew it from my emergency savings and paid James to arrange the exchange. When I got home, Karen and Susie were acting like nothing had happened. They were watching TV and eating ice cream. Karen looked surprised to see me. "Did you calm down?" she asked casually. I didn't answer directly. "I found out where the watch went. I'm getting it back tomorrow." Susie rolled her eyes. "It's just a stupid watch." I looked at her for a long moment. "That watch survived World War II on my grandfather's wrist. My father wore it every day of his adult life. It's the only thing I have left of him." "Whatever," Susie muttered. Karen jumped in. "I think you're overreacting. It's not like she sold your kidney. It's just an object." I realized then that they would never understand. They didn't want to understand. I'd spent 11 years trying to be a father to someone who saw me as nothing more than a wallet and a punching bag, and my wife had enabled it every step of the way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times I'd let things slide for the sake of peace. The time Susie accidentally deleted a work presentation I'd spent weeks on. The time she told her school I'd been drinking when I picked her up, completely untrue, which led to an embarrassing conversation with her principal. The time she purposely knocked over my dad's urn, but claimed it was the cat. In the morning, I called in sick to work and went back to the pawn shop. James had the watch waiting for me. I put it on immediately, feeling the familiar weight on my wrist. It was like having a small piece of my dad back. Family trouble? James asked sympathetically. Something like that, I replied. When I got home, I found Karen going through my drawers. She jumped when I entered the room. What are you doing? I asked. Looking for the receipt, she admitted. I wanted to see how much money you wasted on that watch. I showed her my wrist. It wasn't a waste, and I'm not sure why you're putting wasted in air quotes. It was stolen from me, and I got it back. Karen started the usual argument about how I cared more about things than people, how I was being insensitive to Susie's feelings, how I needed to try harder to connect with her. I'd heard it all before, but this time, I didn't just take it. I didn't apologize or promise to do better. Instead, I asked her a question that had been building for years. Karen, do you actually want me to be Susie's father, or just her ATM? She looked shocked. What are you talking about? Of course I want you to be her father. No, I said calmly. You want me to provide for her. You want me to drive her places and pay for things. But the moment I try to parent her to teach her right from wrong or give her consequences for bad behavior, I'm suddenly just the stepdad who needs to know my place. Karen didn't have a response to this. She just stared at me. I've been thinking a lot, I continued. If Susie wants to act like an entitled brat who has no respect for other people's property or feelings, then maybe it's time I show her what real consequences look like. What's that supposed to mean? Karen demanded. I smiled. It means things are going to change around here, starting now. That evening, I called a family meeting. Both Karen and Susie looked annoyed but showed up at the dining room table. I laid out 3 new house rules. First, Susie's allowance was suspended indefinitely. If she wanted money, she could earn it by doing chores or getting a part-time job like other teenagers. Second, both Karen and Susie would start contributing to household chores. I was no longer going to work all day, then come home to cook and clean while they watched TV. Third, we would all be attending family therapy. This wasn't negotiable. Karen immediately started protesting, saying I had no right to make these decisions unilaterally. Susie just laughed and said, yeah, good luck with that. I calmly took out my phone and pulled up my banking app. I showed them that I had removed Karen from our joint account and transferred half of our savings to a separate account in just my name. This is what financial abuse looks like, Karen shouted. No, I corrected her. This is what boundaries look like. I'm still paying the mortgage, utilities, and groceries. I'm still providing for Susie's needs, but I'm no longer funding disrespect. Susie stormed off to her room. Karen followed soon after, threatening divorce. I sat alone at the table, wondering if I'd just blown up my marriage, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself, and maybe even being the father figure Susie actually needed, not just the one she wanted. The next morning, I found Karen and Susie whispering in the kitchen. They went silent when I walked in. I made my own breakfast and coffee, then left for work without a word. As I drove away, I kept glancing at my dad's watch on my wrist, wondering what he would think of all this. He'd always taught me that respect was earned, not given, and that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing were the same. I decided that it was time to show Susie and Karen what it meant to have real consequences for their actions. I'd been letting them walk all over me for years, and look where that got me. My dad would have never put up with this kind of disrespect. He was always firm, but fair, and I needed to channel some of that energy now. When I got home from work that evening, the house was eerily quiet. Usually, Karen would be watching her shows at full volume while Susie blasted music from her room. I found a note on the fridge saying they'd gone shopping and would be back later. No other details. I checked our bank accounts and, sure enough, Karen had already spent $200 at the mall. She still had her own credit card, which I couldn't control, but at least she wasn't draining our shared resources anymore. I used the quiet time to make some calls. First, I contacted a family therapist recommended by a colleague and scheduled our first session for the following week. Then I called my brother David to update him on the situation. It's about damn time, David said when I told him about the new rules. Karen and Susie have been treating you like a doormat for years. Yeah, well, I let them, I admitted. I was so focused on trying to be the perfect stepdad that I forgot to stand up for myself. David offered to let me stay with him if things got worse, which I appreciated, but hoped wouldn't be necessary. After hanging up, I started making dinner, just enough for myself this time. Karen and Susie came home around 8 p.m., carrying several shopping bags. They looked surprised to see me sitting at the table eating alone. Where's our dinner? Karen asked, like it was the most natural question in the world. I made enough for myself, I replied calmly. There are ingredients in the fridge if you're hungry. Susie rolled her eyes and mumbled something about ordering pizza. Karen glared at me but didn't say anything else. They retreated to Susie's room with their shopping bags, and I heard them laughing about something a few minutes later. The next morning, I woke up early as usual and made coffee. Out of habit, I almost started making Susie's breakfast before catching myself. Part of me felt guilty. I'd made her breakfast every day for 11 years, but another part of me knew this was necessary. She was 16, perfectly capable of pouring her own cereal. When Susie finally emerged from her room, she looked at the empty counter in confusion. Where's my breakfast? She asked, sounding genuinely surprised. You can make your own breakfast today, I replied, sipping my coffee. The cereal is in the same cabinet it's been in for the past decade. She stared at me like I'd suggested she solve a complex math equation. But you always make my breakfast, she said, almost whining. Things change, I responded. Part of growing up is learning to do things for yourself. She huffed dramatically and grabbed a Pop-Tart from the pantry, then slouched back to her room without another word. Karen came out shortly after, giving me a cold look as she made her own coffee. So this is how it's going to be? She asked. You're going to punish us for the watch incident by not making breakfast? I'm not punishing anyone, I explained. I'm just no longer doing everything for everyone else while getting nothing but disrespect in return. Karen scoffed. You're being childish. No, I countered. I'm being an adult with boundaries. There's a difference. The rest of the weekend continued in much the same way. I did my own laundry, but not theirs. I cooked for myself, but not them. I cleaned up my own messes, but left theirs alone. By Sunday evening, the house was showing the effects of my new approach. Their dirty dishes were piling up, and clothes were scattered around their rooms. Sunday night, I reminded them about the therapy appointment I'd scheduled for Tuesday evening. I'm not going to that, Susie declared immediately. Me neither, Karen added. You can't force us to go to therapy, I nodded. You're right, I can't force you. But if you want me to continue covering your cell phone bill, Susie, or the car insurance, Karen, then family therapy is non-negotiable. They both looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I guess they weren't used to me standing my ground. That's blackmail, Karen sputtered. No, it's a condition, I corrected her. Adults make agreements all the time. This is mine. Participation in family therapy in exchange for continued financial support beyond the basics. Monday morning, I left for work as usual, half expecting to come home to find my belongings on the front lawn. Instead, I returned to find Karen in a slightly better mood. She actually spoke to me about her day, though there was still tension in her voice. Susie remained in her room most of the evening, only emerging to grab food before disappearing again. Tuesday was the day of our first therapy session. I came home from work early to make sure we'd all get there on time. To my surprise, both Karen and Susie were ready, though neither looked happy about it. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor that I appreciated immediately. She started by explaining that she wasn't there to take sides, but to help us communicate better as a family. "So, what brings you here today?" she asked after we'd introduced ourselves. I started explaining the situation, the years of disrespect, the incident with my father's watch, and my recent decision to establish boundaries. Karen interrupted several times to give her version, painting me as controlling and unreasonable. Susie mostly stared at her phone, occasionally glancing up to nod at something Karen said. Dr. Martinez listened carefully, then asked each of us to describe what we wanted from our family relationships. I talked about mutual respect and shared responsibilities. Karen mentioned feeling unsupported and misunderstood. Susie, when finally prompted to speak, just shrugged and said, "I don't know, for him to stop being so strict about everything." By the end of the session, we hadn't resolved anything major, but Dr. Martinez had given us some communication exercises to practice at home. She also suggested that Susie and I spend some one-on-one time together doing something we both enjoyed. On the drive home, Karen seemed thoughtful. "I don't think the therapist understood our situation," she finally said. "What didn't she understand?" I asked. "She kept acting like we're all equally responsible for our problems," Karen replied. "But you're the one who changed everything by cutting off the money." I took a deep breath. "I didn't cut off the money. I just stopped letting you both use it without any accountability." The conversation ended there, but I noticed Karen was less hostile that evening. Small progress, I supposed. The next day, I came home to find a surprise. Susie had made dinner. It wasn't anything fancy, just spaghetti with jar sauce, but it was the first time she'd ever cooked for the family. "What's the occasion?" I asked cautiously. Susie shrugged. "The therapist said I should try doing something nice for you, so I made dinner. Don't make a big deal about it." We ate together as a family for the first time in weeks. The conversation was stilted and awkward, but it was something. After dinner, Karen actually helped clear the table without being asked. Later that night, I found Susie sitting alone in the living room, scrolling through her phone as usual. Remembering Dr. Martinez's suggestion about spending time together, I asked if she wanted to watch a movie. "Whatever," she said, which I took as a yes. I put on an action film we'd both enjoyed in the past, and we sat in silence for a while. About halfway through, Susie spoke up. "Is your dad's watch really that important?" she asked, not looking at me. "Yes," I answered simply. "It's not just about the watch itself, it's what it represents. Family history, memories of my dad, the values he taught me." She nodded slightly, but didn't say anything else. Still, it felt like a tiny breakthrough. The next few days followed a similar pattern, small improvements interspersed with old behaviors. Susie made her own breakfast without complaining. Karen started doing more around the house, but there were still moments of tension and resistance, especially when it came to Susie's allowance. "How am I supposed to go out with my friends with no money?" she demanded one evening. "You could get a part-time job," I suggested. "That's what I did when I was your age." She rolled her eyes. "That's so lame. None of my friends have to work. None of your friends pawned their stepfather's family heirloom either," I pointed out. That shut her up quickly. Karen, who'd been listening nearby, actually didn't jump in to defend Susie this time, which felt like progress. Our second therapy session went a bit smoother than the first. Dr. Martinez had us practice active listening, repeating back what the other person said before responding. It was harder than it sounded, especially when emotions ran high. Susie struggled the most, often interrupting with, "That's not what happened," when Karen or I tried to explain our perspectives. After the session, Dr. Martinez asked to speak with me privately for a few minutes. Karen looked suspicious, but took Susie to wait in the car. "You're doing a good job setting boundaries," Dr. Martinez told me once they'd left. "But remember that change takes time. Susie has had 16 years of learning that she can get away with disrespectful behavior. It won't change overnight." I nodded, appreciating her encouragement. "What about Karen? She still undermines me constantly. Your wife is caught between her role as Susie's mother and her role as your partner," Dr. Martinez explained. "She needs time to find a new balance. Keep communicating with her, but also make time for just the two of you. Remember why you became a couple in the first place." I took her advice to heart and asked Karen on a date night that weekend. To my surprise, she agreed. We went to a simple dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date 12 years ago. Things were tense at first, but after a glass of wine, Karen started to relax. "I know things have been difficult lately," she said, toying with her napkin, "but I feel like you're trying to control everything suddenly." I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "I'm not trying to control everything. I'm just trying to establish some balance. For years, I've been doing whatever you and Susie wanted, regardless of how it affected me. That's not healthy for any of us." Karen seemed to consider this. "I guess I got used to you always going along with whatever we wanted, and I got used to doing it," I admitted. "But that doesn't mean it was right. We didn't solve all our problems that night, but it felt like we'd at least started an honest conversation." When we got home, Susie was waiting up, looking surprisingly anxious. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said quickly. I found something for you." She handed me a small box. Inside was a keychain with a fishing lure, a nod to the fishing trips I used to take her on when she was younger. "I remembered you lost your old one," she mumbled. "It's not a big deal or anything." It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot coming from Susie. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I love it." The next morning, I put the new keychain on my keys right away. Susie noticed and gave a small smile before quickly resuming her typical teenage expression of boredom. Things continued to improve gradually over the next week. Susie started doing her own laundry without being asked. Karen consulted me before making any major purchases. We weren't a perfect family by any means, but we were making progress. Then came the setback. I got a call from Susie's school saying she'd been caught skipping classes. When I picked her up from the principal's office, she was sullen and defensive. "It's not a big deal," she insisted as we drove home. "Everyone skips sometimes." "It is a big deal," I countered. "Education is important, and actions have consequences." When we got home, I told her she was grounded for the weekend. No going out with friends, no phone after 9 p.m. She stomped to her room, slamming the door behind her. Karen came home from work an hour later, and Susie immediately went to her with a tearful version of events, painting me as unreasonable. To my surprise, Karen actually backed me up this time. Your stepdad is right, she told Susie. Skipping school is serious. You're lucky he didn't ground you for longer. Susie looked shocked to have both parents on the same page. She retreated to her room again, this time without the dramatic door slam. Later that night, Karen and I talked about it. Thanks for supporting me on this, I said. Karen nodded. Dr. Martinez is right. We need to present a united front. And honestly, I don't want Susie skipping school either. It felt like a breakthrough moment for our co-parenting. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. The next day, I came home to find Karen and Susie giggling together in the living room. When I asked what was so funny, they quickly stopped, exchanging guilty looks. Nothing, Karen said unconvincingly. Later, I overheard Susie on the phone with a friend, saying she was still going to a party that weekend because Mom said it's fine as long as Dad doesn't find out. So much for presenting a united front. I confronted Karen about it that night after Susie went to bed. You're undermining me again, I told her. We agreed she was grounded, and now you're telling her she can go to a party anyway? Karen had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. It's just one party. She's been doing better lately, and I thought she deserved a reward. That's not how consequences work, I explained, trying to keep my frustration in check. If we tell her she's grounded, then immediately take it back? What message does that send? Karen rolled her eyes. You're making too big a deal out of this. It's just a teenage party. I decided to take a different approach. How would you feel if I told Susie she could do something after you specifically told her she couldn't? This seemed to get through to her. Karen was quiet for a moment. I wouldn't like it, she finally admitted. Exactly, I said. We need to support each other's decisions, even when we don't completely agree. Otherwise, Susie will just keep playing us against each other. In the end, Karen agreed to tell Susie she couldn't go to the party after all. As expected, Susie was furious, directing most of her anger at me since she assumed I was the one who'd convinced Karen to change her mind. The weekend was tense, with Susie barely speaking to either of us. She stayed in her room most of the time, emerging only for meals and bathroom breaks. By Sunday evening, her mood had improved slightly, and she even joined us to watch a movie, though she spent most of it texting under a blanket. Our third therapy session was surprisingly productive. Dr. Martinez had us discuss the skipping school incident and how we handled it as parents. She praised our eventual united front, but encouraged us to communicate better in the future to avoid the back and forth that had occurred. Susie actually participated more this time, opening up about feeling caught in the middle between Karen and me. It's confusing when you guys say different things, she admitted, and it's easier to go to Mom when I want something because she usually says yes. Karen looked a bit embarrassed by this honest assessment. Dr. Martinez suggested we create a family contract outlining expectations, consequences, and rewards that we all agreed upon to reduce confusion and inconsistency. We spent that evening drafting the contract together. There were disagreements, of course, but we managed to compromise on most points. Susie pushed for a later curfew on weekends. I agreed if her grades remained above a B average. Karen wanted more flexibility on chores. We created a rotating schedule that everyone could live with. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight, but we had a document that all three of us had contributed to and signed. It wasn't perfect, but it was a framework we could build on. The next few weeks saw improvements with occasional hiccups. Susie tested boundaries, as teenagers do, but the clearly outlined consequences in our contract made it easier to respond consistently. Karen still sometimes slipped into old habits of undermining me, but she was making an effort to change. Then came another major test. I received a call from the pawn shop owner, James, saying he'd seen Susie in the shop again, trying to sell some jewelry. I recognized her as your stepdaughter from when she came in with the watch before, James explained. I didn't buy it, but I thought you should know. I thanked him for the call and checked our bedroom when I got home. Sure enough, some of Karen's earrings were missing from her jewelry box. I waited until Karen came home to discuss it. Did you give Susie permission to sell your earrings? I asked. Karen looked confused. What? Number my earrings are in my jewelry box. I showed her the empty spot where the earrings should have been. James from the pawn shop called. Susie tried to sell them today. Karen's face fell. I thought we were past this, she said quietly. When Susie got home from school, we confronted her together. She denied it at first, then tried to blame a friend, before finally admitting she'd taken the earrings to sell for concert tickets. The concert is sold out, and tickets are going for 3 times the normal price online, she explained, as if that justified theft. Karen looked heartbroken. You could have just asked me, Susie. You would have said no, Susie muttered. Yes, I probably would have, Karen agreed, because that's an unreasonable amount to spend on concert tickets. But stealing from me isn't the answer. According to our family contract, the consequence for theft was loss of phone privileges for 2 weeks, plus paying back the value of the stolen item through chores or a part-time job. Susie protested vehemently, but for once, Karen and I remained united. The next day, Karen helped Susie apply for a job at the local grocery store. To everyone's surprise, Susie actually seemed excited when she got the position, proudly announcing her hourly wage and asking questions about taxes and direct deposit. Maybe this job thing isn't so bad after all, she told me the evening after her first shift. My manager said I did really well. I'm not surprised, I replied. You've always been smart and capable when you put your mind to something. She looked pleased at the compliment, trying to hide a small smile. Things continued to improve over the next month. Susie worked her part-time job, paid back her debt for the earrings, and even saved enough to buy her concert tickets legitimately. Her grades improved, and she started contributing to household chores without being reminded most of the time. Karen and I were working on our own relationship too. We had a standing date night every Saturday, sometimes just watching a movie at home after Susie went to bed, other times going out to dinner or a show. We were talking more openly about parenting decisions and supporting each other more consistently. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. We still had arguments. Susie still had teenage moments of attitude and rebellion, but the overall trajectory was positive. Then came a major test of our progress. Karen's mother fell ill and needed someone to care for her for a few weeks while she recovered from surgery. Karen decided to stay with her, leaving Susie and me alone together for the first time since the watch incident. Are you sure you two will be okay? Karen asked nervously as she packed her bags. We'll be fine, I assured her, though I had my own doubts. The first few days after Karen left were awkward. Susie and I moved around each other cautiously, sticking to safe topics of conversation. But gradually, we fell into a comfortable routine. I drove her to school in the mornings and picked her up after work in the evenings. We took turns cooking dinner, laughing over my failed attempts at lasagna and her experimental stir-fry. One evening, about a week into Karen's absence, Susie asked if we could watch old family videos. I was surprised by the request, but happily set up the player and dug out our collection of home movies. We watched footage of Susie's 7th birthday party, where I dressed as a clown despite my fear of the makeup. 8-year-old Susie performing in her first ballet recital, with me cheering embarrassingly loud from the audience. A family vacation to the beach when she was 10, where I'd spent hours helping her build an elaborate sandcastle. You were always there, Susie said quietly during a break between videos. Of course I was, I replied. That's what parents do. But you didn't have to, she pointed out. You're not my real dad. I turned to look at her directly. Susie, being a real parent isn't about biology. It's about showing up. It's about loving someone enough to put their needs first, to teach them right from wrong, to support them even when it's difficult. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry about your dad's watch, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know how much it meant to you. Thank you, I said, resisting the urge to make a bigger deal out of her apology than it was. That means a lot to me. The next day, Susie asked if we could visit my father's grave together. I was surprised by the request, but agreed. We stopped to buy flowers on the way, and Susie insisted on picking them out herself, a mixed bouquet of simple wildflowers that would have been exactly my dad's style. At the cemetery, I watched as Susie carefully arranged the flowers against my father's headstone. She stepped back and stood quietly beside me for a few minutes. What was he like? She asked eventually. I told her stories about my dad, how he'd taught me to fish, his terrible dad jokes, the way he always helped strangers in need. I showed her the watch on my wrist, explaining how my grandfather had worn it throughout World War II and passed it down to my father, who gave it to me. It's not just a watch, I explained. It's a connection to the past, to the men who helped shape me. Someday, I'll pass it on to someone I love too. Susie nodded thoughtfully. I think I understand now. When Karen returned home the following week, she was amazed by the change in our household. Susie greeted her with a genuine hug and excitedly told her about everything they'd missed. Her job, a good grade on a difficult test, the dinner recipes she'd learned. What happened while I was gone? Karen whispered to me that night as we got ready for bed. We just spent time together, I explained. Talking, remembering, getting to know each other again. Our next therapy session was the most positive yet. Dr. Martinez noted the improved communication and mutual respect evident in our family dynamic. She suggested we continue our weekly sessions, but reduce them to once every 2 weeks, as we seem to be developing healthier patterns on our own. That weekend, Susie asked if we could revisit our family contract to update a few points. I was impressed by her initiative and agreed immediately. Karen joined us at the dining room table as Susie presented her proposed changes. I think I've shown I can be responsible with my job and school, she began. So I'd like to discuss extending my weekend curfew by 1 hour. Instead of making demands or throwing a tantrum, she presented logical arguments and examples of how she'd demonstrated trustworthiness over the past months. Karen and I exchanged surprised glances before engaging in a mature negotiation that ended with a compromise we all felt good about. Later that night, after Susie had gone to bed, Karen turned to me with tears in her eyes. I didn't think this would work, she admitted. When you first stood up to us, I was so angry, but looking at our family now, she trailed off, gesturing around at our peaceful home. You were right. We needed boundaries. All of us. I pulled her into a hug, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. We still had challenges ahead. Susie was still a teenager after all, but for the first time in years, I felt like we were truly a family working together rather than against each other. The next morning, I found a small package on the kitchen counter with my name on it. Inside was a framed photo of me and Susie from her first ballet recital, along with a handwritten note to the dad who always showed up. Thank you for not giving up on me. I traced my finger over the frame, remembering that day clearly, how nervous Susie had been, how proud I felt watching her overcome her stage fright. I glanced at my father's watch on my wrist, thinking about the legacy of fatherhood it represented. Not always perfect, often challenging, but always worth the effort. Morning, Susie said, walking into the kitchen in her pajamas. Did you see the picture? I did, I replied, my voice a little rough with emotion. It's perfect. Thank you. She ducked her head, embarrassed by the sincerity of the moment. Well, you're the one who always took pictures of everything. Thought you should be in one for once. As I made coffee for myself and hot chocolate for Susie, a weekend tradition we'd recently revived, I reflected on our journey. The road to healing our family hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been painful confrontations, setbacks, and moments when I wondered if it was worth the struggle. But watching Susie now, confidently moving around the kitchen making her own breakfast, occasionally asking my opinion or sharing a story from work, I knew the answer. Sometimes, the hardest battles yield the most meaningful victories. And sometimes, being a parent means standing firm even when it would be easier to give in. Karen joined us a few minutes later, and the three of us sat together at the table, planning our weekend with a comfort and ease that would have seemed impossible just a few months ago. I caught Susie glancing at my watch, then meeting my eyes with a small, understanding smile. We weren't perfect, but we were finally a real family. Not because of biology or legal documents, but because we'd done the hard work of learning to respect, support, and truly see each other. And that, I realized, was worth more than any watch, no matter how precious its history. As Karen, Susie, and I sat together planning our weekend, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The past few months had been exhausting, but worth every difficult moment. We were making progress, but I wasn't naive enough to think our problems were completely solved. Healing a family takes time. Later that day, I caught Susie staring at my dad's watch while I was washing dishes. She quickly looked away when she noticed me watching her. You can ask about it if you want, I said casually. She hesitated for a moment. Does it still work? Like, does it keep time right? It runs a little slow, I admitted. Probably needs to be serviced by a professional. Susie nodded, looking thoughtful. Maybe that could be my next paycheck. Getting it fixed for you. I nearly dropped the plate I was washing. You don't have to do that. I know, she said, but I want to. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Karen's mother, calling to say her condition had worsened, and Karen needed to stay another week. I saw the concern on Karen's face as we talked about arrangements. The older woman had been having complications from her surgery. You should go, I told Karen after hanging up. Your mom needs you. Karen looked worried, but we were just getting back on track as a family, and we'll still be here when you get back, I assured her. Susie and I managed fine last time, right? Susie nodded. We won't burn the house down or anything. After Karen left the next morning, Susie surprised me by suggesting we clean out the garage that weekend, something I'd been wanting to do for years. I tried not to show my shock as I agreed. Saturday morning, we tackled the garage together. I found an old fishing rod I used to take Susie out with when she was younger. Remember when you caught that huge bass at Lake Miller? I asked, holding up the rod. Susie smiled. You were so excited you fell in the water trying to help me land it. The photo of us holding that fish is still on my desk at work, I admitted. She looked surprised. Really? After all these years? Of course, I said. It was a great day. We worked in comfortable silence for a while before Susie spoke again. Could we maybe go fishing again sometime? I mean, if you want to. I'd like that, I replied, trying to keep my voice casual despite how much her request meant to me. Later that evening, Susie got a call from her biological father. I could tell by her expression that something was wrong. She went to her room to talk, and I tried not to eavesdrop, but I could hear her voice rising with emotion. When she finally emerged, her eyes were red and puffy. I didn't push, just asked if she wanted some ice cream. We sat on the porch swing with our bowls, and eventually, she opened up. He's having another baby, she said flatly. With his new wife? I'm sorry, I replied, not sure what else to say. He said he wants me to be a big sister to the baby. She made air quotes with her fingers. But he hasn't even seen me in 3 years. He forgot my birthday last year. I let her vent without interrupting. When she finally ran out of steam, I just said, that really sucks, Susie. You deserve better. She looked at me with surprise. You're not going to give me some speech about how I should forgive him or whatever? I shook my head. Some people aren't good at being parents. That's on them, not on you. She was quiet for a long time before saying, thanks for being different. The next day, Susie asked if we could call Karen's mom together to check in. This small gesture of family solidarity meant more than she could know. We had a nice chat, with Susie actually asking thoughtful questions about her grandmother's recovery. After the call, Susie mentioned she had a school project about family history. Could I maybe use some of the stories about your dad for it? Of course, I said, surprised by the request. I've got some photos and letters in the attic if you want to see them. We spent the afternoon going through old boxes. I found pictures of my dad in his army uniform, letters he'd written to my mother, and even some of his old tools. Susie seemed genuinely interested, asking questions and carefully handling each item. He seemed like a good guy, she said, looking at a photo of my dad teaching me to ride a bike. He would have liked you, I told her. He always said strong-willed people make the world change. She smiled at that. So, I'm not just stubborn? Oh, you're definitely stubborn, I laughed. But that's not always a bad thing. When Karen called that evening, she sounded exhausted but was clearly touched when Susie told her about our day looking through family photos. For the first time, I felt like maybe we really were becoming a family, instead of just people living in the same house. The following week brought new challenges. Susie's school called to say she'd gotten into an argument with another student. I left work early to pick her up from the principal's office. It wasn't my fault, she insisted as we drove home. Amber was saying horrible things about Lisa because she can't afford designer clothes. So you called her a stuck-up brat and knocked her lunch tray over? I asked, repeating what the principal had told me. Susie crossed her arms. She deserved it. I took a deep breath. Standing up for others is good, Susie. The way you did it wasn't. She was quiet for a moment. Are you going to ground me again? I think we need to talk about better ways to handle conflict, I said. And yes, there will be consequences according to our agreement, but I'm also proud that you wanted to defend someone. She looked at me with surprise. You're not just mad? Life isn't black and white, I explained. I can disapprove of your actions but still appreciate your intentions. That evening, we called Karen together to explain what happened. To my relief, she supported my approach, agreeing that Susie needed consequences, but also recognition for her good intentions. We decided Susie would write a reflection on better ways she could have handled the situation and apologize to the other student. I'm impressed, Karen said to me privately after Susie went to bed. You handled that really well. Just trying to be fair, I replied, like my dad would have been. When Karen returned home the following weekend, she brought news that her mother was finally doing better, but would need regular help for the next few months. I was thinking, she said hesitantly over dinner, maybe we could invite her to stay in our guest room for a while, just until she's stronger. I looked at Susie, expecting resistance to having her grandmother in our space, but she surprised me. That makes sense, Susie said. Plus, Grandma makes really good cookies. We all laughed, and just like that, our family prepared to expand temporarily. I spent the next day clearing out the guest room, with Susie helping rearrange furniture and set up the space. Is this weird for you? She asked as we worked. Having Mom's family move in? A little, I admitted. But family helps family. That's how it works. Susie considered this. You know, when Mom was staying with Grandma, I looked at your browser history. My eyebrows shot up. You did what? I know, invasion of privacy, she said quickly. But I saw you were researching step-parents' legal rights. Were you thinking of leaving us? I sat down on the bed, trying to gather my thoughts. I was exploring all my options, I said honestly. I needed to understand what rights I had if things didn't improve. She nodded slowly. But you stayed. I stayed, I confirmed. Because despite everything, you and your mom are my family, and I don't give up on family. The day Karen's mother moved in, we all worked together to make her comfortable. Susie showed unexpected patience, helping her grandmother navigate the steps and arranging her medications on the nightstand. That night, Karen found me in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. We're making it work, I replied. No, she shook her head. I mean for standing up to us months ago. If you hadn't, we'd still be the same dysfunctional mess we were before. You forced us to change. I pulled her into a hug. We all did the work. The next day, I came home from work to find Susie and her grandmother in deep conversation at the kitchen table. They stopped talking when I entered, which immediately made me suspicious. Everything okay? I asked, setting down my briefcase. Fine, Susie said quickly. Too quickly. Her grandmother just smiled mysteriously. Susie was just helping me with something. I let it go, but over the next few days, I noticed whispered conversations stopping when I entered rooms and Susie making mysterious phone calls. Under normal circumstances, I might have worried, but there was something different about her secretiveness this time, less defiant and more excited. The mystery was solved that Friday when I came home to find Karen, Susie, and Grandma dressed up nicely in the living room. The coffee table was set with a small wrapped box and a cake. What's going on? I asked, confused. Happy Family Day, Susie announced, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Family Day? I repeated. Karen stepped forward. It was Susie's idea. She wanted to create a new holiday for us to celebrate becoming a real family. I was speechless as Susie handed me the small box. Inside was my father's watch, but now it was professionally cleaned and repaired, looking better than it had in years. Grandma knew a guy who fixes antique watches, Susie explained, and I paid for it with my job money. I carefully put the watch on, noticing how smoothly the second hand moved now. It's perfect. Thank you. There's something else, Karen said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a legal document, adoption papers for Susie. You don't have to sign them, Susie said quickly. It was just an idea I had, since you're already my real dad in all the ways that matter. I looked at Karen, who who nodded encouragingly. We've talked about it a lot. It's what we both want, if you do. I've wanted this for 11 years, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Susie smiled. So that's a yes? That's absolutely a yes, I confirmed. We ate cake and talked about the adoption process, which would take some time to complete. Susie's biological father would need to relinquish his parental rights, but based on his history, we didn't expect much resistance. Later that night, after Karen and her mother had gone to bed, I found Susie sitting on the porch swing. Can I join you? I asked. She nodded, moving over to make room. Thank you for today, I said. It meant a lot. I just wanted to make things official, she replied. You know, legally and stuff. The legal part doesn't matter as much as you think, I told her. We became a real family when we started respecting and supporting each other. She considered this. I was pretty awful to you, wasn't I? You were going through stuff, I said. We all were. Still, she insisted. I want to do better. That's all any of us can do, I replied. Just try to be better today than we were yesterday. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the evening sky. Hey, Susie said eventually. Remember when you said the watch connects you to the past? That someday you'd pass it on to someone you love? I remember, I nodded. Could that be me someday? She asked hesitantly. I looked at her, this complicated, challenging, amazing young woman who had somehow become my daughter through years of struggle and love. I think that would be perfect, I said honestly. The adoption process took several months, with paperwork delays and a brief objection from Susie's biological father that he withdrew when he realized it might involve paying back child support. Through it all, our family continued to strengthen. Karen's mother eventually moved back to her own home, but visited regularly. Susie maintained her job at the grocery store, saving money for college and occasionally buying small gifts for family members, just because. Karen and I continued our date nights, rebuilding our partnership with new understanding and respect. On the day the adoption was finally official, we took Susie to her favorite restaurant to celebrate. As we waited for our food, she suddenly grew serious. I've been thinking about my name, she said. After the adoption, I want to change it. Not my first name, but my last name. To yours. Karen squeezed my hand under the table as I tried to respond. Are you sure? I asked. That's a big change. Susie nodded confidently. I'm sure. You're my dad. For real now. In every way. As we drove home that night, with Susie falling asleep in the back seat just like she used to when she was little, I glanced at my father's watch on my wrist. The second hand ticked steadily forward, marking time not just for me, but for our whole family. I remembered how close I'd come to walking away when things seemed hopeless. How tempting it had been to give up when facing the wall of disrespect and entitlement. But something, maybe my father's voice in my memory, maybe just stubborn determination, had kept me fighting for the family I knew we could be. Looking at Karen beside me and Susie in the rearview mirror, I knew that decision to stand my ground had been the right one. We weren't perfect, we still had disagreements and challenges, but we faced them together now, with mutual respect and understanding. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Sometimes you have to weather the storm to reach calmer waters. And sometimes the family you fight hardest for becomes the greatest gift of your life.